sent you a few texts with no love back.
Well, yesterday I did see it.
Do you happen to have an extra pen, anyone?
It's funny. The
Oh my God. Okay, that's not fun.
And then drive home in the blizzard storm.
took place in 22.
Did you go to Lansing yesterday, Nicole?
No.
Oh, good.
You know,
I drove to work with my boss today. By that I mean he drove me.
Good. How about you?
All right, thank you.
hours to come home from Ann Arbor. Yes,
Yeah, my
Friend said it took him 2 hours to get home from Dexter last night.
Yeah, my brother said the same thing. He came to my mom's house. I was talking to her yesterday, and he said to get there 2 hours. So no.
Okay.
We're all gonna be plugged in somewhere. You know.
2020 is a whole new decade, Nicole.
Can't wait.
And
Can't wait for it. Can't even wait.
it's going to be great for you.
It is going to be great for me.
I gotta go back up to the hospital.
It is. It is going to be very, very wonderful. I claim it in the name of Jesus for me.
What year Jeep do you have?
A
2019? A 19 Compass. I'm trying to buy a Jeep soon, and I'm debating between a used Jeep because I'm like, well, my car insurance is lower if it's not a brand new car, or do I want a brand new Jeep?
I love my car.
Depends on the kind of brand new Jeep you want.
Well, I want a Cherokee. I drive a Lansing a lot, and I want to be safe in the winter.
Well, you're a couple years out from the new gen Cherokee's release, so you should be free of a majority of gremlins. But the transmissions on those newer Jeeps are
And older.
And older.
That's what I hear.
70,000 miles. That's what they got.
Beth, what do you know about cars?
Because you were the one telling me that I should get like a. Yeah, I pointed to you, Jennifer.
Oh, okay.
You were the one telling me that I should get like a used with like low mile, like.
Like a lease turn-in's not a bad deal, you know?
Yeah, I mean,
Is
Hey,
Mr.
Dad.
Wilcoxon gonna be here?
Joe. What's up, Daddy?
Oh my God, it's 7 o'clock.
It is.
We have a quorum. All right then. I don't know, has anybody heard from Mr. Wilcoxon?
I talked to him about 4 hours ago.
I'm calling this meeting to order. Clerk Halenga, good evening, everyone. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Wilcoxon. Councilmember Brown.
Present.
Councilmember Somerville.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Richardson. Councilmember Morgan.
Present.
Councilmember Simmons.
Present.
Mayor Bashir.
Present.
5 present, there's a quorum.
Thank you very much. Somebody text Councilor Wilcoxon, just see what's going on.
Yeah, I'm right now.
And please rise as you are able for a moment of silence and a pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Or
Thank you. It's a minuscule agenda, so I expect very few changes or suggestions.
Can I also move to excuse Counselor Wilcoxon?
Please.
So I move.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to excuse Councilor Wilcoxon. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? No. Okay, so all those in favor of the agenda? Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. It's now time for public comment, and I just want to do an introduction before we go into this. This is a work session. This is different than a normal session of City Council. This is for our audience. We're not going to be voting or making decisions tonight. We're going to have a discussion, a guided discussion with staff, so that staff receives guidance and a sense of what council wants to have happen. This particular work session is focused around Water Street. Welcome, Councilor Wilcoxon. And so public comment tonight can be on anything. Nobody signed up? Okay, great. This is one of the times in our agendas when we welcome your comments on anything related to the city. Everyone will have 3 minutes to speak. We welcome your comments, observations, and suggestions. Please make your comments to council as you would want us to speak to you. Courtesy costs nothing. This is not a conversation. It's time for us to hear your thoughts. In some cases, we will respond to questions at the end of all speakers. If you would like a back and forth conversation, please make an appointment with one or several of us at a different time. Thank you. Let's welcome our first comment from, and did I see your hand, Mr. Hergott? Thank you. Please state your name and address for the record.
Mark Hergott, 111 Miles Street. Water Street isn't Water Street. It's 20 years of deferred fiscal dysfunction that has fallen upon you, whether you wanted it or not. The thing about public comment is anyone can come up here and offer ideas for 3 minutes. And my sincere urging is to look at ways to remove yourselves from the 4 square mile tax prison for yourselves and for the people that come after you. The Vector trucks for the city. They cost so much to run. They depreciate at a particular rate. You have to buy some new. What are you doing? There's the YCUA. You've got Michael Bodery on the board. Talk to them, come up with a contract, and use their Vector trucks and have them with the liability. Look at ways to remove yourselves and your future members from these problems. Now, there's just the one unit on the brownfield tax increment finance, the Family Dollar. Don't direct staff to not use that money. Put that money into some sort of high yield fund until it's actually money. Don't spend it on administration. Spend it on, as nihilistic as this sounds, spend the money on money so that it makes more money. Look at ways that are not what you've done before that have worked in other communities. For instance, perhaps special assessment districts for particular neighborhoods so that they can have more detailed snow removal work, perhaps like on Garland Street. Look at ways to solve the problems in ways that are sustainable and dynamic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hergott. Who else would like to give a comment to council at this time? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment, and I have nothing to say at this time for council. I'd like to invite staff up. I know you've prepared a presentation for us, and looking forward to hearing all of your wisdom.
I don't know about all that. Well, good evening, council.
Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Myers.
Congratulations. Thank you.
I know. Yeah, look, can we just have a little moment of joy for Mary, the newest city employee?
11 days old today. 11
Congratulations.
days old today. So Andrew, if you could go to the next slide. Tonight's presentation. So most of council is relatively new. We have a couple people who have been on for a little bit, but a lot of council is relatively new. And so I wanted to kind of give you guys a Water Street presentation to let you know where we have come from. I think it'll be helpful. I also, in front of you, which will go on our city website, we put together a timeline. This is still in almost final draft form. I just want to go through and fact check everything. I feel pretty confident in what I handed out, but I think this helps. And so this is going to go through the bulk of my presentation. There will be some graphics, and I really kind of want to share with you a little bit more, but this is kind of an easy fact sheet. It had to go on an 11 by 17 paper because obviously Water Street's history is storied at best. So we're going to kind of go through, how do we get here? That's the bulk of the presentation, only so you guys can know where we came from. Then, some obstacles to moving forward with the development. Inquiries that we've had on the property. One thing the mayor and city manager have really asked me to do is track all of the development inquiries we've had, and we can go through some of those. I won't divulge specific information, but I'll kind of let you know where things are falling apart. Then also talk about our recommendations on moving forward, as well as some direct questions for you at the very end. So kind of giving you guys a whole bunch of information, letting you guys think about it, and really helping guide us to move forward at the end. So that's kind of what we're looking to get out of this meeting, as well as answer any questions that you have. And if we can't answer them, really find out the answers. So Andrew, next slide. So just to start, back in 1970, Water Street was an industrial area, obviously, and the community really started to look to what the area was going to do, what it was going to be in the future. Residential construction was becoming more popular again, and so in 1998, we received a $200,000 grant to actually vision for the site, and really, put together some environmental assessments, market studies, and urban design plan. And if you go to the next slide, we actually had a design charrette. So the next slide after that really shows what the community came up with, which you'll see a bunch of the iterations of the development come forward for Water Street. But as you can see, it really is pretty much what every plan has called for, right? Residential component, commercial component, high density, continuing roughly the block form coming off of River Street and on Michigan. Obviously, with zero lot line on Michigan Ave. Now, fun fact: this was kind of innovative in 1998, whereas we were still using some pretty typical zoning where it was very segmented. And so, really, to continue the zero lot line on Michigan Ave was a pretty big thing for communities back in the day. So, next slide. Then we received a CMI grant from the state to purchase some land, and then we received a $3 million grant and loan from the state of Michigan for acquisition, relocation, planning, and environmental testing.
What is CMI?
CMI is the Coastal Management Initiative.
Thank you.
No problem. So the next slide goes into, we created a TIF plan in 2001. Technically, Water Street is in the DDA, although there's agreements that if any revenue is generated from that, it goes to help pay the bonds. And on the next slide, you'll see kind of my favorite little slide, which is we were supposed to have collected $18 million in TIF revenue on this year, total. So it was about $1.5 million a year. Obviously, that has not panned out. One of the main reasons why is we created this is something you shouldn't do. And a lot of the things that have happened on Water Street are learned lessons, right? But we bought we created a TIF, which had a value. Then the city purchased all the property, which then gave us zero value. So then the TIF went from almost $3 million to zero. And then we never sold the property. So we've owned the property ever since. So it's still a zero value outside of Family Dollar and the Honda dealership, which is technically in the TIF. I know, weird. Wow. But anyways, it is actually underwater. We don't collect any revenue on the TIF. So it kind of is just a body that's there. And if it ever collected money, we would then use it. Yeah, unfortunately, we do not have a $1.5 million or the $18 million that we had thought we would have by 2019. But just so you know, all of these things were in process, and we really had thought that we were going to have some great opportunities because the plans have always been pretty solid. So next slide. In 2001 to 2003-ish, we're still kind of, our records aren't always the best, but that's when we started to really acquire the property. We're going to go through a bunch of slides now, probably 5. I want to show you guys, just because I think people don't remember what was there. So if you keep going, and just slowly go through them, Andrew. But this is what the site looked like in 2001 to 2003 when we purchased the site. Most of the buildings were boarded up. It was the old iron and metal company.
Where's the sign?
The sign is no longer there. So this was all before demo. And then so even though people complain about how Water Street being vacant, I do think it looks better than what it did back in 2003, because imagine what it would look like today, because I don't think they would have actually been redeveloped at this point. So, next slide. So in 2002, 2004, we put out an RFP, selected Biltmore. Most people have seen the plans, but the next slide shows it. It was to build 874 residential units, and then potentially back out some of those for a commercial component on the ground floor, especially at Michigan Ave and in the brown areas. But that was still going to be flex space, either residential / commercial. Once again, the plan doesn't look too much different from the original 1998-9 charrette that we did back on Michigan Ave. And we have all these plans in our office that anyone can look at any time. The Biltmore concept, we actually purchased the plans when the deal fell through, so we have binders and binders of concepts on what this actually was going to look like. I didn't want to film the presentation with that because in 2004, the deal went south. And Andrew, next slide. In 2003, we bonded for acquisition and remediation funds, just to kind of see where the funding broke down, because I think people think we just bonded for all this money, and that's how it worked. The next slide kind of goes into our funding mechanism. It's a little hard. Like I said, all these are online, so you can actually go through it, but we received a $200,000 EPA pilot grant, $3.7 million from the Clean Michigan Initiative. Not coastal, it was clean, sorry. $3 million from the Community Development Block Grants. We bonded for $13 million. We did a land revolving fund. This was the actual cash we injected into it, which was $600,000. We also got a $170,000 Cool City grant for the property, as well as $150,000 from the Greenway Initiative, $100,000 from the Community Foundation, and then another $1 million from the DEQ. So, while we did spend a whole lot of money and bonded for most of this, still about half of the money actually did come from other sources. So this wasn't just the city being on the hook. We got a lot of grant funding for it. Next slide.
Did we spend all the money for its intended purposes?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the reason I know that is all of the grant funding that we've gotten is reimbursement grants. So, yes. In 2004, the city conducted some additional remediation and demolition activities, and then Biltmore backed out. So, this wasn't so much the economy at the time. I think just the deal didn't work. I think they were going to build too many residential houses at the time. I wasn't here. I was still in college at Eastern at the time, but still,
Aw.
yeah.
I wasn't even thinking about college yet.
Yes, baby Joe. I was in urban planning school, so.
Did you have a rolly backpack?
No.
Oh, I was wondering. It was 2004.
It smelled bad, though. Come on, I was a college kid. Next slide. So in 2005, we released another RFP for the site. And then next, hit again, which looks very awesome. As you can see in our 2005 wisdom, it was a Word document. Next slide. We went under contract with Joseph Fried and Associates to develop a mixed-use residential development. If you look at this slide, once again, not much different than what Biltmore looked like and what the 1998 looked like. For the most part, residential housing, commercial development, a little more parking, but with obviously just the plaza coming down from River Street. Next slide. 2006, the market was starting to turn. Joseph Fried and Associates saw the writing on the wall, and they backed out, and so the city decided to take over development of the site. And we contracted with CBRE to market the property and sell it into smaller parcels as a phased approach. City acquired some additional money from the EPA to clean up the contamination in 2011, and then we also received a Great Lakes Restoration Grant to put the nursery, the fruit nursery on the site to hopefully plant fruit trees throughout the city. And then after we did that pilot project, we realized that we can't plant those because the fruit in the trees are toxic. So now we have some old fruit trees that you can't eat the fruit off of on Water Street.
The toxic stuff has to go somewhere.
Yes, but it was a way to actually get the toxins out of the ground. So it wasn't completely.
Till the fruit falls to the ground.
And it goes from underneath to on top.
So, next slide. Then we entered into an agreement with Washtenaw County Parks and Rec to do a recreation facility, which, if you go to the next slide, is kind of one of the many concepts of it. It was going to really be amazing. A pretty 450,000 square foot facility, kind of the anchor kingpin of the site. Next slide. And then we also got our first property sale, which is the Family Dollar. We sold the piece of property for $210,000, and we've actually been collecting TIF revenue on it ever since to go towards a project if it were to come available. We collect about $30,000 a year for that, and the Washtenaw County Brownfield Authority holds that in case we have any remediation efforts. 2013, we did the Shape Ipsy Master Plan, which I'm assuming most of you are familiar with. Next slide, Andrew. Oh, sorry, that's the Family Dollar, which you've probably seen, so we don't have to dwell on that. And really it was to do a grid structure, building fronting on the street, emphasis more on form and placements of building than use. We have pretty liberal use requirements on the site because we do want to see it more of a development, more grid style. Next slide. This is kind of what we've been selling. D is obviously where Family Dollar is, and A&E is where the rec center was going to go. K is where the Herman and Kittle property would go to, which we'll talk about in a minute. But this is kind of the plan that we've been working off since 2013. We'll get into some of the concerns about that in a little bit. But then, right after we created this plan, Herman and Kittle came in and said, "Hey, we want to do a development. We want to get 4.5 acres, utilize the site for multifamily housing to utilize low-income tax credits, which are not Section 8 vouchers. It's more of a AMI development where you work with MISTA and the federal government to actually subsidize part of the housing, so you can actually get people 60 to 80% of the median income into housing."
It's workforce housing. Yeah, is what it is.
Then in 2014, council adopted the infrastructure plan, creating the different blocks for sale, which you saw from the master plan. Andrew, this was Herman Kittle. It was going to be a pretty nice urban form development. Next slide. The Family Dollar actually closed, started construction, and then we started construction on the bridge and trail. And one of our biggest achievements in the last 3 years actually is staff went to the MEDC and said, "Hey, we can't afford to pay back the $3 million loan from Community Development Block Grant," and we actually convinced the MEDC to convert the loan into a grant, so we no longer had to pay it. So the city is now no longer owing of that money, which is really huge.
Wow.
Yeah.
When was that?
That was spring of 2016. They don't want a whole lot of people knowing it because they don't want other people doing it, but we made a really solid case. We know some people, so it definitely helped. Then in fall of 2016, as you all know, Washtenaw County Parks and Rec Commission withdrew the purchase agreement from the rec center. There was 5 extensions in that agreement, and they withdrew it officially in 2016. Next slide. Spring 2017, Herman and Kittle withdrew the purchase agreement because MISTA will not allow any sort of low-income housing tax credit properties to be on this site unless we remediate the site to full residential standards, which we'll get into in a little bit. But then right after Herman and Kittle backed out, International Village put in a letter of interest. So if you actually go to the next slide, you can see it doesn't look much different, the actual concept. I know there was going to be some Asian flair in that, but if you really look at the developments, if you go back, you look at all 4 of the developments, the actual form there, residential, mixed use, commercial, with roughly the same block plan. Next slide. Right after that, we realized that we had to do some additional cleanup needed to open the trail back up. So we had to shut down our Water Street Trail, which was pretty bad, and we weren't happy about it. We worked with Washtenaw County to get that cleaned up. Then, after we had to shut down the trail, We held some public meetings, and the public really vocalized some concerns with the developer, the development, and the financing, the EB5 financing that they were using. In September, council still wanted to see where it would go, knowing that there was not a final deal, but they wanted to see if it was possible. They voted to proceed with the purchase agreement. Also, right before that, sorry, my slide's a little off, but voters adopted a Water Street millage to help us pay down the debt. So that actually helped relieve some of the burden on city services, which was a really huge success. December of 2017, contingency period expired, ending the purchase agreement on International Village, which effectively killed that deal. But then amending the timeline on a positive note, in summer of 2018, we got to reopen the Water Street Trail. So that's kind of the timeline. We're going to get into some actual questions, but I just kind of went through that quickly. Don't want to take up a whole bunch of your time. But I hope some of that was at least informative, because I do think that a lot of people don't know the full history and realize that we've had a lot of developments, and not all of the, actually, none of the deals have been killed by the contamination on the site. Okay? Because there are funding mechanism to actually handle that.
Before we go into some of the later parts of the discussion, do you want to stop and see if council has questions about the history? Okay. Council, what questions do you have about the history or anything that Mr. Myers? Councilor Coxon.
Has this ever been zoned for residential? Was there, I mean, I saw a picture of the house there, but like most of it was industrial for like 100 years, right?
Well, so zoning's only been allowed since 1926, so we haven't had zoning for that long. So those have been there for a while. I mean, directly adjacent to Water Street is a residential neighborhood, so some of it has been. As far as zoning, right now, it is zoned for part residential. But for the most part, throughout its entire history, the vast majority of the site has been manufacturing.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councilor Coxon?
No, at this time.
Other questions from council? Councilor Morgan.
I suppose with the individual plots, it looks how they're shaped up. How diverse can the development be? Like from like food service, from housing. Like how diverse are they looking to develop there?
So, per our zoning, and you know, and a lot of the developments, if they were a large scale, they would probably come in as a planned unit development. But our zoning is extremely flexible to where anything you just said, plus some, could really be allowed. Right now, the zoning is for the most part high density, mixed use development. On probably the top half closest to Michigan Ave, the bottom half does allow for townhouses, and row houses and things like that. But for the most part, the top half is really more of like a downtown mixed use zoning. With all that said, a planned unit development really would allow the developer to work with the city to actually get the development they wanted. So the zoning wouldn't matter as much. It would more be the form, which is really what we're trying to do with the zoning anyway.
It was said, if I'm not mistaken, at one point in 2013, it was looked at as $335,000 per acre.
We'll get into that in a minute.
Okay, and now, okay.
I do have one question. So the layout for all of these look similar, but like as far as the different proposals compared to the international concept, was the height of some of the were there height differences in the size of like the buildings?
Biltmore really wasn't. It was more to be 3-4 story.
Yeah, because Cherry Hill Village, like I've been through there, and yeah.
But as far as our zoning goes, we allow 10-story.
Right. Yeah, I was just wondering if there was like differences in height from because I couldn't tell clearly on.
So, you know, Joseph Reed and Associates never got far enough into it to figure that out. So, you know, height's always a tricky one. Because we have 10-story buildings.
I'm pro going high. So,
yeah. No. So we allow it. So it just kind of. The reason why I wanted to show all four of like from the original conception 98 to now is really the concepts are roughly the same. We keep getting the same concept. It's kind of what it seems like people want. And we'll get into why that matters a little bit more.
Yeah.
In a couple of questions.
So is there anything about the geology of that space that would not allow for taller buildings? reading stories about the health center. There were opinions in news stories that that site wasn't suited for that structure for geological reasons. So that's not true.
I've not heard that, but what I know is that we're pretty sophisticated in our building materials and building ways we build now, and so there hasn't been any concern about height. I mean, you might have to do a little bit more support and things like that, and actually do some pilings, but it's not out of the question to go higher. It's more of the developer's payback at this point.
Further questions about the history? Okay, thank you, Mr. Myers.
Okay, next slide. So obstacles to moving forward with Water Street. The biggest one is it's not a 38-acre parcel anymore, even though everyone keeps saying that. And actually, I don't have the correct number, but it's more along the lines of 28 to 30 acres. The main reason is we took a 100-foot swath, we were required to when we did the Water Street Trail, and took that out of the 38 acres. So we really have to come to terms with the fact that it's not a 38-acre parcel anymore. It's more about a 20 to 32, but we will get the exact figure. We just don't have that yet. The current block plan, and this is what I wanted to get to now, requires substantial infrastructure. And the city doesn't have the money to fund that infrastructure or even really maintain that infrastructure, because when you lay down all the water and sewer pipes, that costs a lot of money, right? And roads, you know, it's a substantial cost. If we block it out, we can't really ask for the developer to pay for the infrastructure costs unless they have two parcels, right? So that's a big concern with the current block plan, because we don't have the money set aside to do the infrastructure, and we can't just require, you know, there's certain laws that the city can't require a developer to put in infrastructure that we should already have there. We can work out anything with the developer agreement, obviously, but it's one of those concerns when you have something as rigid as the block plan. Also, the site is contaminated in certain areas and not in others. So when cleaning up a site, you kind of use the site that you have to actually generate the revenue to pay it back. So really having a larger scale development helps that, because you can create more revenue to pay off that property. It's not just a single, you know, this one parcel C, right? If I'm not actually using that one in particular, but if parcel C was more contaminated than parcel A, and you sold parcel A and C together, you're not going to get the same cleanup value out of that. So really having a larger scale development proposal really helps when doing some large scale environmental remediation. Currently, it's going to cost anywhere from $8 million to $23 million to clean up the site. $8 million is on the low end, and that's to do more of a commercial industrial use. When you do the residential uses, it gets brought to the $23 million. The reason that the Herman and Kittle project failed is MISHDA has said if you want to put residential housing there, you have to clean it, so any affordable housing, you have to clean it up to the $23 million standards. And so that's an issue, right? Because it costs substantially more to clean it up to residential standards than it does to commercial standards. Also, because of those things, any new development because we have the community benefits ordinance, we need to take that into an account, because right now you can only use brownfield redevelopment as one piece of the community benefits ordinance. And so that just adds another thing where you can't pay back as much when you actually incorporate some of the community benefits that cost money. Yes.
So there's $8 million level, there's $23 million. We're talking about the whole property now, correct? Okay, so I have two questions related to that. One is, are there levels in between?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so one is full residential, one is full just
Industrial.
straight industrial, and then the others would be like light industrial,
Commercial, mixed use, things like that.
Okay, and then the second question is, gotcha. Oh, so the Herman Kittle thing, did they want us to clean up the entire property to that level? Oh, all the entire,
yeah.
not just the property that they're on.
So according to MISHDA, because they know the contamination on the site, any property, any tax credit deal, so any sort of affordable housing that would happen on Water Street would have to be cleaned up to environmental standards unless we decide to fence it off completely, which you don't want to have low-income housing fenced off.
No.
So that's where so you could fence it off and basically fence off the road to get to it, even. So, I mean, that's what they have indicated in their letters.
Is that $8 million and the $23 million, is that based on the 28 acres or the 38 acre space?
So it's based on the property as a whole. I will say that in order to open up the Watershed Trail, we had to do extensive remediation along the trail. So essentially anything around the trail's safe, completely safe. So that's already been remediated. So this is just to clean up the interior of the site.
And we've been using those same numbers for many years now.
We have, but our environmental consultants have felt confident with them. And it is a broad range, but that's because when dealing with environmental contamination, unfortunately, you don't know until you get there. And once you get done, so this is what we found out with the Watershed Trail. Once we got done, they did some testing, and there was two small areas that had slightly elevated, and so we actually had to cover them in rocks, so no one could actually get there. So if you're ever that's what the beautiful rock gardens are. And there's rocks on that, and then rocks under that, and rocks under that, so no one can get to it. So.
Last question. Back in 2001 to 2004, when we acquired some funds for remediation, were those funds, do you do remediation based on how much you have to cover the space? Like when your money runs out, you're done doing the testing?
So all the funding that we received was to do different parcels. So back when we were purchasing Water Street, we purchased a parcel here, parcel there, parcel here, parcel there. Each one of those was to actually remediate a certain area. And so, and the map I have, I didn't mean for this, and I'm definitely happy to answer. I didn't mean for this to get into the environmental, so that's why I didn't include that in the map. But we have the map basically showing there's a couple big hotspots, like I said, hypothetically parcel D and F or whatever are where the hotbed of the contamination is, and it's pretty much the area that's fenced in, and then basically everything around it is within relatively good levels, which we've tested within the last 2 years.
Further questions? Okay, keep going.
Okay. Another issue is that we've been using the price of $335,000 per acre. Where did that come from? We took the $20 million in bonds that we had and divided it into 38 acres, and that's what we came up with. Recently, we had an actual valuation put on the property. $5.7 million is what they're saying it's worth. That does not include the contamination, and the reason being is that's assuming that the city will just fully cooperate in all the environmental brownfield cleanup. So that actually does put a little bit of a question on the CBO if we do require certain aspects that cost money. That would actually lower the price that we have right there. But in order for us to get a price with the contamination, it was going to take another probably year, right, Christopher? At least to actually do the proper appraisal. And so we said because we have brownfield TIF, we felt comfortable. So now we're looking at about $150,000 an acre. So next slide. Everyone always asks who's calling, right? So we've kind of broken it out into certain different categories. The latest and greatest, 15. This happened in the last month and a half. Marijuana uses. I had one today. Yes.
Why is the holdup that there are no licenses left? I'm assuming is it because we need to go back and amend the medical chapter?
So right now, up until the ordinance was passed, that was the main reason.
Right.
The other issue on Water Street is right now we only allow for provisioning centers in the center district. And so all of this property is zoned the center district. And while we will have 3 properties, a lot of them weren't very serious offers. They just wanted to buy the whole piece of property for a dispensary. I get some weird.
How much were they offering?
They didn't have a price. The next biggest one is obviously affordable housing. And unfortunately, what happens when those come in, I tell them to call MISHDA because I don't want them to waste their time.
Contamination issue.
I let them know the issue we've had, and then they call MISHDA, and I never hear from them again. Housing is the third His third one, we've gotten 10 in the last year. Contamination is always a concern because of the level that they would have to remediate the property to. Mixed use is obviously our favorite one that we would like to see. We've gotten about 4 of those. Those are more of the people who think that they can really do the development because they got a $100,000 inheritance. And it takes a lot more to do that, to develop on this site. We do have 3 realistic prospects. I had a meeting with one of them today that I'm actively in discussions with to do plan on property. So there are realistic prospects, but until we get to a point where they have some sort of a pro forma for me to bring them to you, that's why we don't bring them. Because right now some of it is still in confidential talks. But basically the first one to bite would come to you. And if they all came at the same time, you guys would have an opportunity to look at that.
So the realistic prospects don't fit into any of those categories? Or
There wasn't a holdup, okay? There's not a holdup with those. Those are just more people doing their due diligence, looking at kind of our market, our area. Usually with realistic prospects, there's about 10 to 20 meetings that happen prior to getting to a deal. And that's because they want to know a little bit more about the city, the permitting, the zoning, all of those things. They want to get a feel for the community. And so usually there's a couple walkthroughs, a couple tours, things like that. So since January of 2019, had about 88 calls. This is what I have tracked. Some of the less realistic ones did not get put on here, but this is roughly what we get about a year. Next slide. The process moving forward. Does anyone have any questions on anything I've talked about?
I'm trying to make sense of this. I just want to ask a question.
And do we go back a slide?
No, each parcel has been separated, so they've been measured.
No.
They haven't been measured. So has every parcel been tested for remediation, or some of them are still open to be tested yet?
So the way environmental testing works is you kind of just do borings every 20 feet.
Okay.
And then you kind of see where it's at. And then you go back and retest and figure it out. So the whole site has been tested.
Okay.
Okay.
Can they kind of average how much remediation per acre?
Not really, because it's sometimes it's a guess. But basically, if they get a hot spot, then they dig a certain area around that hot spot.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question. So as far as how it is, you said earlier that there's a lot of flexibility in the way that it's zoned.
Yeah.
So like, one example, say somebody was interested in putting like a movie theater. Like that would be acceptable, like something that would fit into.
So that might be a little bit more challenging because we typically don't allow big box style developments in our downtown, right? But as far as uses go, we would allow theaters, yes.
Sure. Okay.
So it's more of a square footage. We would allow a grocery store over 50,000.
Like a smaller size.
A smaller size, well, but you could also do multiple things in a development. So, and there are ways to do larger developments.
Thinking like the size of like State Wayne on Michigan Avenue in like Wayne, Michigan.
I don't know State
Oh, it's an Old Dollar Show.
Okay.
There are 4 theaters.
It's a great.
Yes, no,
The only place I
That-
go for movies.
that could be
They
allowed.
have heated seats.
No, that could be allowed. It's just more of a, we would have to really look at the zoning, but yes.
Yeah.
The problem with theaters is there's not a whole lot of money in them right now, and so it's hard to see, it's rare to see them being built.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we just don't have. Yeah.
Well, we have a theater, we just don't have.
Right. It's not a theater.
Not a
It's a theater, but it's not like the theater that I'm.
But no, so basically right now on Water Street, the uses that are not allowed would be adult regulated uses, heavy manufacturing, and like our lots, automotive uses. So that, other than that, we're pretty much open.
But could there be? So maybe we can go. I'll wait.
No, ask. This is what this is for.
Well, I saw that later in the slide we can give feedback on our vision, so maybe that fits into that.
Yeah.
That was just one question I had, because people are always, there's nothing to do for, kids have nothing to do in the city of Poughkeepsie, or just on this side of the county in general. So like, how do we make fun activities more accessible to them?
So I think when we meet with developers, one of the things when we talk about our community, we talk about the gaps in services and available, entertainment and housing needs in our community, right? And so we need more apartments, we need more houses in a certain price point, we need certain, businesses that are missing from our area. And so we talk about those needs, and I think that that's where it comes up, right? And if the developer can find an economically viable way to fit it in, then we've got,
Right now for fun, other than a park.
So next slide. So kind of where I envision us going forward. So I was trying to figure out, do I put this slide before the next slide? But I'm going to kind of tell you my vision, but then I really want to hear from you guys. So what I'm recommending is that we work with the Michigan Economic Development Corporation to market Water Street as a whole as a certified redevelopment site. We're pretty much there as far as it being a redevelopment ready site, but we do need to complete the following steps, which is number one, create a vision. And I want to make sure that the vision we've had for the last 20 years is still the vision of council. You guys, besides, the mayor, Nikki, and Mayor Pro Tem, you guys are all within the last year, right? And so really getting a handle on what your guys' vision of the site is. Once we kind of understand what your vision is, and we can do that through goal setting, hold some actual public engagement sessions to get community input. It's one thing that, the city is always... And we're really good at holding community input sessions unless there's a big development. Okay? So we will make a charrette for a hypothetical development all day long. But it really gets hard when we actually are proposing a real development and getting the actual community input. So that's one thing we really do need to do, and it is a requirement of the state. Identify the incentives that would be available. We can bring in the community benefits ordinance to this, but really, the MEDC really wants to say that, hey, if you do this development, we will give you this. We are expecting this. Okay. Create a committee of community champions so we can actually help champion the development through. It's one thing we've never done. And then package it up in a nice big bow and create it like an RFP or just an actual package to market. So that's kind of what I would like to see, but we need to go through the next questions first. So next slide.
Do folks have can we see if council has questions about any of that last?
And we can come back to this one too.
Okay.
But I just want to kind of give you guys my overall vision because the next slide is important because this is what I need from you. So I know I just gave you a whole bunch of info, right? But
So questions about that last section, about what would go on here. Councilor Brown.
So number 3, where it says identify incentives that would be available for the site, what exactly do you mean by that?
So is the city willing to negotiate on purchase price?
Oh, okay, so that kind of, okay.
Yeah. Is the city willing to offer brownfield redevelopment, brownfield TIF? Is the city willing to? There are some Commercial Reinvestment Act things that you have seen, particularly on the Lowell Street property. This was a couple years ago, where it's a way to encourage some fresh food, along with housing and commercial development. So there's a couple of, I want to say like an Oprah, but not really, because an Oprah is rehabilitating an obsolete building. This is more building a new one. So there's a couple incentives that we have.
So things that you kind of already have in mind, but are we willing to?
Yeah.
Work? Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, if you guys are,
Are you asking me what incentives?
I
you
am.
want, or-
I am
well,
asking.
Well, also on the next slide, I know.
Yeah.
I meant like, do you already have things in mind that could be incentives that we're just not offering.
if we need to get the $5.7 million out of the property, then we can't negotiate on that. If we can, that makes us a little bit more competitive. Are we willing to talk about brownfield? Yes or no? And it can be a hybrid of both. And we can say these are on the table, but we're not going to give you all brownfield and a $0 or a $1 sale, right? So it's one of the things that we really, as a council, need to talk about before we actually take it to the community, because you guys, if it's a no-go from the beginning, then we shouldn't start with it. So, anyone else?
Okay, thank you.
Next. So I'm going to go through these questions, and then we'll kind of maybe we can go through, I don't know how you want to do it, but kind of the questions I have for you is, what is your vision for Water Street? That's a loaded question, right? So we kind of broke it down into some other things. Is council willing to negotiate on the price of land for the development you desire? So that's the other thing. We have a lot of control when we own the land and we set the perimeters. So something that we really need to look at is the mixed-use block plan as presented in the Biltmore, Joseph Fried Associates International Village in the 1990 vision, as well as the Shea Bipsy vision. Is that still what we want to see, or should other alternatives be explored? And then people always ask, are we going to send an RFP? Are we going to work to market it? What are we going to do? The three options we have are just put it out on an RFP for redevelopment, work with MEDC to promote it, or work with another real estate firm to market it. All of them are legitimate options, and I kind of want to get your input.
So I want to start with the second question first, because I think that it makes sense to start with just talking about what council sees physically on that property. Do we want to stick with the mixed-use, dense housing kind of, streetscape model that has been out there? What are your thoughts about that? Are there other visions that you have? Throwing it out there. Okay.
I like the mixed-use streetscape, but I mean, I'm also open to other things, where if there was one area and then, the rec center, some of that kind of, where it's, some different things that add value to our city overall, recreational or entertainment with housing, kind of mixed in that respect, not necessarily in the same thing, but I don't know. I mean, I'm fairly open.
I would like to add, of course, with the prices of some of the property going from 350,000 acre or to 150,000, getting the accurate price was fair. I think before we can determine what we would want to negotiate it as, where our ceiling is, and what can we do to? Because it seems like since it's the 70s, this whole wrap up, it seems like it hasn't gained any money for the city since then. So it's like it's a lot of groups of people who get together and nothing actually moves forward. So have we successfully removed all the obstacles, whether it's remediation, whether it's pricing, whether it's the things that make it attractive so we can move forward? Because it seems like every decade deals are stopped for one reason or another. So have we done our due diligence to make it as attractive so we can put a valuable, credible piece of land that people can find some joy in? And saying that, I'm thinking like hypothetically a roller skating, right? A rollerblading and roller skating where well lit, it provides activity. It is more age expansive for young to old. It's right down the center of downtown. You have to go to Canton to skate or out further, so we can use other municipalities to come support, just so it can be a bridge where we can make money and utilize other cities also. So have some partnerships in that. So I don't know. I just think I'm surprised I didn't see parking up there. No one's calling to turn it into a lot. Huh?
Well, there's a lot of people that are calling to turn it into a lot.
Okay.
But the problem is, up until 2 meetings ago, downtown actually, the parking problems aren't as severe as they are in Depot Town. And Depot Town didn't have a proven market because we weren't charging for parking, and we still aren't yet, but we're in the process of working that toward. So it's really hard to actually build a lot, especially on one of the prime corners for us to actually build on, to put a surface parking lot, which is actually the least desirable, I would say, type of parking. With all that being said, that could happen, but if you look at, we have lots way closer to Depot Town that are empty, that people aren't using. So, and if you look at our bus system all day, that's driving around that EMU pays for to take you downtown to campus, it's never full, right? So the trolley systems don't always work. People say they will, but the proof is always in the pudding when it comes to those things. So it becomes an issue when really looking forward. One of the other things, sorry, Councilmember Morgan, but one of the things people always talk about is let's just turn it into a park and be done with it, right? That's been said many of the times. But based on the funding that we have gotten from the EDA as well as the state of Michigan, we've gotten a lot of economic development funds for the demo and remediation, so we can't use it as a park. We actually have to turn it into some sort of tax generating properties. So, obviously, no one really gave me a head nod for that, so that's not what council's direction is, but that has been brought up in the past.
Wouldn't that also require the cleanup
Yes.
with no chance of getting anybody to pay for it?
And one of the roadblocks is the contamination. Now, granted, that hasn't killed any of the deals, but it is an issue. The problem is the way to fund the cleanup is to have tax generating property.
I'm going to go back to the question that was on the table, which is what vision do we have for this, right? And so I just want to have a discussion I want to stay away from what's right or wrong with that. I just want to gather information. So we've got, one comment about being positive on the dense housing mixed use. We've got a roller rink, which I love the idea of, and don't have ankles anymore, but would love the concept of it. Anyway, there's all kinds of great ideas out there, but the idea for 30 acres of roller rink, I'm not sure. We really have to think about the whole property. That's what our job is here. So,
Well, I
Councilor
think-
Simmons, Mayor Pro Tem, I'm sorry. Haven't heard from you yet.
Chief Roberts and I both had it when we back in the day, and that is to build up the riverfront, something like San Antonio, and with shops and restaurants and using money to dredge the river so that boats would be able and canoes would be able to pull up to a dock along there, and people would be able to get out, go shopping, have dinner, walk along the river, and get back in their boats and go home. And with the other, with scattered housing throughout, I always felt, and there were many others that felt that 400 and some housing units that Biltmore had put before us, that it was just too dense. But to use some of it as scattered housing, and also along Michigan Ave, some businesses. But definitely focus on the river. We've got a river that we don't really use. We don't advertise. Because we don't use it. And I think that the river could really be an asset, since it's right there, if we would take advantage of it and build along the river so that we have a real lucrative waterfront. And I think that would be the thing that we would possibly need, that would make it the best thing going. We would have to work on it, but I think that we could get it done.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Councilor Somerville.
So I like the layouts for pretty much every proposal that has existed in this timeline. One thing that I think would be neat to include the businesses along Michigan Avenue. It would be nice to see like the business. In my head, this works. Parking, like 2 layers of parking, and then the business on top of it.
No,
Yeah, just
right now that wouldn't be allowed under the zoning ordinance. It could be allowed through PUD. If you look at kind of some of the places, Detroit has it, Birmingham has it, where you have business, parking, apartments. That works for the condos upstairs. Doesn't always work for the businesses because people are going there more in their car. You want to create the walkability, and people don't always walk a whole lot around parking structures. It's just one of those weird things that people like to park and go. So that's where if the form can work, it does work. But if it's more of a structure with some businesses at the bottom, it doesn't always.
Well, that's also, you bring up a good point too, with like another thing that would be interesting along Michigan Avenue in those businesses is to have like apartments above them, which I was interested in. I'm also super interested in the density, because I think that we need it, especially moving, like, just thinking 20 years from now. I think Michigan in general, I think we'll see an increase in folks from other states moving here, given that, climate change and And also, I think it would be nice to try to incorporate solar into like every single aspect of the process, you know.
Just to add, anytime a developer comes into the city and they don't have solar as part of their project, we tell them that they probably should.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if
Well,
you
it would
look
just
at
be
if you look at what they're
nice.
doing with the Thompson
Yeah.
block under their
Yeah.
carports, all solar.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Cool. And then I already mentioned the movie theater.
Councilor Brown?
Yeah, so I also like the mixed use idea. I have no issue with the previous plans. I think that along the lines of kind of what Councilor Somerville and Councilor Morgan were saying about just being a little more youth and our more seasoned constituents and community members focus. So as far as recreation, and that doesn't necessarily mean like a rec center, but somewhere that is walkable, rather than being in the township where it's talking about, you know, something major going up, that people can get to utilize, to have a sense of community, a bigger space, because we don't have any big, like large communal spaces that can be multi-purpose. So maybe some type of multi-purpose center, multicultural center, something of that sort that can house events or activities, and that in itself be a mixed-use location. And then I like the idea of the movie theater too. Actually, I think,
On Michigan Avenue,
Yeah,
across from the
that'd be great.
bridge where people are
yeah, I think that's a really good idea. I like that.
lights. And a cool sign.
But yeah, I definitely think we need to have a focus on having something that's walkable for people to get to in the community, outside of you know, like apartments and shops.
Yep.
So.
And restaurants. We have lots of those.
Councilor Wilcoxon, any thoughts on the vision of?
Yeah, I've thought a lot about lots of different kinds of things. I'm not married to mixed use. I think that really ties our hands in terms of spending $23 million or getting somebody who's going to cough up that money. I think using this as a multi-purpose commercial use will certainly save us money in that regard and add to our downtown. A theater, a roller rink, having, you know, you look at some of the cities around where I grew up on a river that was an industrial, you know, it was a rust belt west of Chicago. And they turned that into an economic boon by developing along the river, not so much as Mayor Pro Tem is suggesting, because dredging the river, just, you know, there's no boats going to come to that. But enhancing the path that's already there and having storefronts along that, people sitting on a terrace looking at a path in the river is still an option for a business, and I think that requires less cleanup for those kind of things than going residential.
If I didn't make it clear, mixed use developments actually don't always require the same cleanup as residential, because it's technically a commercial use.
Right.
It's only when you involve the affordable housing piece. Because the affordable housing piece gets MSHA involved, and MSHA requires a higher cleanup standard.
So if you just do private home development without affordable housing,
If it's private single-family home, that's different. If it's private multifamily, mixed use, residential upstairs, then it's more of a commercial use. I know it sounds weird, but that's one thing I want to make clear, is that it's MSHA standards are different than some of the environmental standards, which are different for single-family residential, multifamily residential, but multifamily is different if you were to put an apartment complex versus a mixed-use development. I know that it shouldn't make sense,
I think I got that.
but there's a clear distinction.
So based on that, does that impact your thoughts that you just expressed?
Yeah, I'm just all about avoiding $23 million for affordable housing on that site. And I think there's other opportunities within the city to expand affordable housing without incurring.
So in general, can I sum up, and I want council to kind of just, I'm going to sum up what I'm hearing for staff. I'm hearing general support for mixed use, dense housing, similar vision with some focus on trying to find some multi-generational, particularly youth, entertainment kind of value in there for one of the businesses or more of the businesses. Am I summarizing close enough to what we're talking about here? That is an acute need, and this is an opportunity. But in general, outside of some of the specifics, we're mostly saying that we're okay with continuing to consider mixed use, dense housing mixed use. Is that fair enough? Okay. Okay.
I'm like, get away from housing. Just don't even think about it.
Well, see,
We need more housing.
Yeah.
we need housing.
I would vote for a hotel that over housing. I mean, so people can pay and leave and keep paying, so we can earn income as opposed to just having people.
I think I'm kind of in
Don't
the middle.
forget the river.
Well,
Thank you.
I think I'm open to the path we've been going down with the mixed use and dense residential, but then also, I don't necessarily want to put all our eggs in one basket, right? So I'm kind of with Steve where if something viable comes that adds value to our city, but doesn't necessarily include, dense housing and the whole parcel, then I might be okay with that. And I agree with Mayor Pro Tem that this whole area has like really underutilized river, fronts, and obviously it would be nice, to do something nice, and which I think really probably would naturally maybe occur here, but that would be great to really utilize the riverfront of, not just having the backs of buildings, kind of facing that, but somehow to utilize it better with, that's why I'd like to see the restaurants or the things that everyone can kind of enjoy. But I guess I'm open to any viable plan or proposal, whether it's kind of the plan we've been going down.
So I think does staff need to put out a vision, okay? And this is, yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So I guess one of the main reasons for this question is this, and Mayor Pro Tem actually brought it up on the phone. The vision for the site has always been a dense, mixed-use site. Okay, and dense is the key word. And whenever we bring a dense plan, people get upset because they think it's too dense. Like some cities, like Novi, actually have density requirements in their zoning ordinances saying, you can't have more than, 7 units per acre, okay? Because we're a city and we're dense by nature, we don't have those rules. So density is not always a concern of a city like us because we're dense by nature. I mean, I have a giant lot in the city and I have a quarter of an acre, right? And I just stumbled upon that. So really, is density a deal breaker? Because if it is, we have to build that into any sort of plan that we do.
I don't think density is a deal breaker, but I don't think we need to be 100% wedded to it either.
Yeah.
Because again, I want options open so that we are casting the widest net of looking for viable development.
Okay.
So one of the reasons for us putting out our vision is because it protects us from visions that come to us that have a lot of backing that don't fit us at all, and then we put a lot of energy into them. Okay, and so one of if we don't say what we want, we definitely will not get what we want. Okay, and I want to speak about, so I want to encourage us to say, okay, this is our vision and we want to put it out there, whether it's this or something else. But the idea is, I don't think that if somebody showed up with a bag of money and said, I want to build one large mansion there and I'll pay you X million dollars in taxes a year, whatever, okay? I'm pretty sure we would figure out a way to make it happen. Making up something that's so patently ridiculous it's not going to happen. But the idea is that we need to put our vision out there so that we get what we want. If we don't put our vision out there, we will get nothing. So, and that's kind of a little bit of what's happened at different times in our history here. And I also want to talk about the use of dense housing. It's kind of a catchphrase, and it has a lot of meaning. It does fit the needs of our city. I'm going to just say that, we're at a capacity for housing in our city right now, and we need apartments and we need homes for people. We're both are at saturation levels right now, and so the idea that we have this large undeveloped piece of property that could help alleviate some of that stress on our community and add some more inventory available for folks. Dense is more affordable than big. And what is the first thing anybody says that they need in our city? They need affordable housing. And so this is why some of the thinking behind the language. Okay. And again, it doesn't have to be the vision that we leave staff with tonight, but that's the background behind it. Is that helpful to folks? Okay. So I'm not sure that you then have the vision that you.
No, I think actually, because Christopher's taking diligent notes right now. So, so don't think we're not listening. That's why I have my right hand man sitting there, making sure that everything gets taken down. Plus, we have Andrew doing a great job. What I want to do is actually, we're going to go back, watch this meeting again, obviously, and look at Christopher's notes, look at Andrew's notes, and really kind of create a vision that we think would satisfy council. Okay. And then use that to create a marketing package, whatever it may be.
And I also want to speak to I agree about the river. The river is a vital resource in our town, and we're actually right now working on a major investment in that river in the removal of the dam, and that's going to allow us to develop and beautify that park there. It's going to be amazing. So that's going to really enhance our river footprint. And then, thank you for bringing it up, Mayor Pro Tem. But also, I think one of the challenges of that property is that the border-to-border trail goes along the river there, correct? And so, what's the status of that border trail with the river, Mr. Myers? What's that going to do to the development? Is it going to stop before the border-to-border trail there?
Yeah. So there's 100-foot roughly easement that basically you can't develop. Granted, we would be able to put like a dock out there, a viewing platform type of a thing, but you can't develop to the riverfront because there is, by getting the grant that we got, we had to basically protect the area roughly 100 foot from the center of the river, or from the edge of the river to back. That's why Water Street's no longer 38 acres.
So the good news is it's always going to be green and beautiful.
Yes.
Okay, that's the good news. And okay, and so so you have what you need as far as the vision goes.
Yeah.
Joe? Just do council.
Yeah. I just want to say,
Morgan.
as much as I appreciate wish lists and visions to me are like the North Star. But as far as a mission is like a roadmap on how to actually get there, which would be much more appropriate. I think real numbers, actual space, what we looking at viable pitches to put into the actual space as opposed to what we hope to see. I hope to see some things that bring the city money, of course, but what do we have at our disposal to get there? That's what I'm more interested in knowing. But I appreciate the presentation and thank you so much.
Just to respond,
Yes, sir.
just respond to that. So how we get to the actual roadmap that you're looking for is to because we had never had a presentation like this at council, it's really hard for me to say, I actually understand what Councilmember Morgan's thinking. Because I didn't know what you thought, actually. And so now I'm kind of understanding, and I get, you want to know the numbers, you want to know the facts, you want to know how we get there, right? But I want to make sure that what we're drawing up we're not wasting our time. We're not wasting your time. So, yeah, sometimes these work sessions do seem a little drawn out, but there is a method to the madness, and I promise you, we're at least going to have something for you to thumbs down at us at the end of this.
Okay.
Councilor Wilcoxon, you had a.
Yeah, I just wanted to put my comments in context. I don't want people to leave here thinking that I'm the boogeyman in terms of housing. I just wanted to shift that and get people to think outside of that paradigm, because we put this up so many different times and it's never happened, and people come and go and do those kind of things. And the question earlier was, are we sticking with that because that's the only thing we've ever thought about? Some other interesting ideas have come out, but taking the extreme view and saying, forget about housing altogether, I mean, I think we need to move in different directions besides just looking at these things, and they all seem to be the same. Is it suitable for what we're doing? And is it affordable? So, just want to clarify that.
If I may.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yes, I do agree with you somewhat, Councilman Wilcoxon. And when I, think of what I envision, even though I said mixed use, I wasn't necessarily talking about housing. I would love to see a nice business building there for office space, not manufacturing when I say building, but business space where people could have business. That would make a beautiful business park with keeping in line with developing as close to the river as we can, where people, for the shops and the restaurants and stuff, where people can sit and look at the river. In some way, possibly building the border-to-border trail where people would walk along the river, being a part of what is built along the river. I've talked to a number, just aside, I've talked to a number of developers, and in talking to a number of developers, they've all said basically what you said, Mayor, is that we need to know what we want. We need to have it planned out, and we take what we want and take it to developers and not wait for somebody to come to us, but we need to know what we want. Bay City, for those that were at the MML, Bay City had a property very, very much like Water Street, although they still had the buildings on their property. A developer came in and developed, it was along a river also, developed, and it's absolutely beautiful. And they somewhat knew what they wanted, but they were also open to receiving and hearing from the developer. And they won the prize this year, the award at MML convention for the development that was done there. But it was basically the same kind of large plot of land there on the river where the buildings were ready to be demolished and all, and a developer came in. I spoke with them when I was there, and just very, very briefly because it was time to go back into session, and I have tried to reach out to Bay City and am waiting for a call back from them. So, but I think that if we really kind of decide what we want, and I think that there are some developers out there that are looking for spaces very much like what we have, and I just believe it's coming close to our time to get something there on, and we won't have to call it Water Street anymore. We can rename the whole development.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Somerville.
I have a question. So earlier when we were talking about the trail along the river, can we go back? So how much money did we spend fully?
So that was a Washtenaw County grant because we weren't allowed to get
we
grants.
didn't match that or anything.
We matched it with some. It was a lot.
Okay, but also we couldn't obstruct that by building anything on it.
We could build a recreational asset.
Sure, but we couldn't put anything else. No. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that.
No, we would go into a conversion issue, which we don't want to ever do again.
I just wanted to.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councilor Brown.
So I'm just looking at the maps, and I know you can't tell us much about the three viable things right now, but are they inquiring about a parcel or about the entire plot?
Two are the entire plot. One is a parcel.
Okay. So as we're marketing this, or as we're going forward, currently, how are we marketing the land? Come buy a parcel, or
Either.
So, whatever you want.
But we've been marketing more limitedly because we hadn't had this conversation with council. And so more of it is people coming directly to us. But we take all calls, we take them all very seriously. And because even though some of them that we get are definitely off the wall, some of the off the wall ones actually have happened. So
Never know.
And so I guess I'm asking because I'm also thinking of your questions about our vision and also like what council's thoughts would be on if we're offering like a marketing package at some point. What should we be marketing? Do we want to market per parcel? Are we saying we're marketing as the way we are now, like whatever idea you have come to us? Do we want to market it as all or nothing? I don't have an opinion specifically on which way to go, but I do think that if we're, I do have thoughts about both, I guess. So, I don't know, I just want to know what other folks' thoughts would be on that.
I wonder how we market it with the existing business that's on there already. The Family Dollar, do you have to market it a different way because it's already a parcel? And would that limit what other businesses would want to exist close to that one?
it's a great question. And almost every single developer that I talk to about the site wants to know if they're willing to sell.
Ooh, they want
Oh, cool.
So because they would rather have the whole parcel than that one. And that parcel in particular is a reason that parceling it off really concerns me. Because while we do receive tax revenue from the Family Dollar, it's actually been an enforcement nightmare ever since it started, ever since it was built. So the trail of enforcement's pretty long.
And so, if I just to finish, the reason why I was asking is because when thinking about it and looking at the picture, the one that had all the letters on it, I get very nervous about like if somebody wants to buy A and then K and then L and then they're like, oh well, nobody else wants the other stuff because of how it's all mixed up. I think that could be a huge barrier in developing the land. So something for us to think about giving that overarching directive that we don't want it marketed per parcel in that respect, unless you're buying adjacent parcels or like some type of take the ability to get like random pieces where we end up with a whole bunch that are left that people don't want because based on location or proximity to something else.
Do you think that by again, I'm open to just viable development, right? So, right, it'd be nice if it was all developed in one fell swoop, but I recognize that there could be some really great, parceled ones. But ultimately, right, the preference would be for one development. But sometimes, I don't know, based on your experience, where it's like kind of like it's like dominoes that fall. Like one development happens and it kind of inspires people. I don't know. Then another parcel sells and another. It didn't happen with Family Dollar, but I don't know if something that's a little bit more.
The sad part about Family Dollar is we've ended up in some circles in the state, in economic development circles, kind of been the laughing stock of, well, you don't want a Family Dollar on your primary development site, which is really sad. But everyone thought that was going to be the rec center. Everyone thought that was going to be the rec center, and then it wasn't. So I look at it as, and I was chatting with Christopher today. There's a few actual huge issues with the site. One of which is the contamination. Second of which is there's a DTE power line running through it, which costs $1 million to underground. And in order to get electricity to the site, you have to underground that utility wire per DTE. That's something that not one developer actually can manage. So the city has to take that on to do that, or we have to work with a larger scale development that can put that into the cost and make that as part of the development. So once again, the larger developers, smaller developers, there's a lot of pros and cons. Any developer that were to do anything on the site would be a phased approach. No one's going to be able to do this all at once. But really more get a master developer that can work with other people is really kind of the idea that I've really honed in on.
Councilor Coxon and then Councilor Somerville. He raised his hand.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Couple questions. So you've got two different realistic proposals. Three. But two are for the whole parcel. So that seems to say that, so what are they looking to do? Because my impression is the plan that we've been throwing around for a long time doesn't seem to be attractive to people. Is that what they're looking at?
So when I say realistic perspectives, I don't have a drawing that I could share with anyone. It just doesn't exist.
Right, but I mean,
So one of them is more of I would say mixed use, but it's more like this is the commercial area, this is the residential area type of deal. One is more mixed use, and one is basically really working with us to be like, what does the city need? And so we tell them, and they're trying to figure out, does that work into their pro formas? Because any development that we do on this site, and this is where people get upset, but any development that we do on the site has to get bank financing. To get bank financing, you have to prove that you can pay the money back to the bank. And so everything has to go through big, long pro formas to see if a bank will even propose to financing it, because no one's going to have the money to actually do this all at once.
Some people have.
Councilor Somerville?
I had another question.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Cox.
I'm just taking up space over here. The $1 million to bury.
Yeah.
I mean, we've talked with people about absorbing other costs, turning loans into grants and things like that. What's the possibility of getting DTE to eat that?
DTE started the negotiations at about 1.3, and then back in 2016, we got them down to about 780. DTE doesn't. So the places that we've got converted from loans to grants are more our state partners.
Oh, sure, I get that.
DTE is a great partner.
I'm sorry.
Nice.
But no,
But okay, so I understand that you have to bury these things.
Yeah.
Who made that requirement? Was it-
DTE.
Right. So they're telling us we have to do this, and you have to pay us to do it.
Yeah.
I've done this at my house. What a scam. Right? I'll say it. You can't say it, but I'll say it. It's a scam. So if we can get them down on the price or get them to,
And we haven't actually brought them to the recently because we haven't had a legitimate development proposal. But still, regardless, there's going to be a substantial cost to it,
sure.
as well as a substantial cost to run the water and sewer line. Now, Yucca has the infrastructure because our Yucca's plants were built for a few Ford and GM plants that are no longer in operation. But this site doesn't have any infrastructure. So all of the water and sewer lines have to be run. Power line has to be undergrounded.
Electric, gas, streets,
Internet.
yep, all has to be put in.
The plans that have been floated here, to me, I look at those and I go, those don't look very efficient at all. In terms of that infrastructure, because you've got some of those, I just thought like somebody had some out-of-body experience, because you've got one set of housing and buildings that look one way and another one that just kind of juts into the middle of it. I was like, who designed
It
that?
was more the phased approach.
Right. But there are ways to construct on that property that makes that much more efficient than doing standard blocks and the kind of pictures that I've been seeing. So can that be brought in?
It can. I can say I was not employed at the city at the time that any of these came forward, and so I can't tell you the rationales behind some of them. Some of them were done more quickly, like the Joseph Reed Associates, because they were only working with the city for about 7 months. The International Center was working with the city for about a little less than a year. But I can tell you that the Biltmore plans, there was 2 years of solid work. Next time you're in my office, I'll show you the binder. It's fascinating. So there was a lot of thought and process that went into all of those. Some more than others.
Councilor Coxon,
I'm
further
done.
questions? Thank you. Councilor Somerville?
Oh yeah, I just want to. So the dealership, has that raised any questions from anyone? Like building additional businesses across the street, and that being what you look at?
No.
No, I was curious since.
I mean, it's the same thing that people always said about Washington Street, right? Washington Street would never be successful because of the tenant at Pearl and Washington. And I'll tell you what, I heard a rumor the last lease got signed for Washington Street to be a full block again with multiple different businesses of different varieties. So, no, not that I've heard of. The actual bigger issue has been the compost.
I actually speak with the dealership over there and spoke with them frequently, and that dealer would really like to see something sensible happen with that property. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
All right.
So
I
further
have-
questions? So,
I have two
now go to the first question, I think.
Oh, the second.
The second,
Yeah. Is council willing to negotiate on land prices if it is the desired development?
Is it worth it? Like, is it worth it?
Well, so the three. Sorry, I'll wait.
I just think like because it seems like everything's pending or depending on something. We could move forward, but this, and this, but DTE, but this, but like it seems like is it worth it? Like yeah, I mean I'm willing to move prices if we're giving people what they're asking for and they can move forward with it. I think it makes sense.
The most that we've actually been offered for the site is $15,000 per acre. That's the most we've been offered in the past. 15,000 an acre.
Councilor Somerville?
Well, so the three folks that are interested currently aren't being given any incentive to be like there's no incentive for their.
They know there will be. There's always an incentive when it comes to a development like this size.
Sure.
But we haven't had the discussion at council, and that's why when they kind of come to council, that's why we have this discussion up front, and not to like pigeonhole ourselves, but to really discuss the options.
Can I ask a question about the question? Okay, because it's hard for me to separate out the value of the property from the value of the whole development, right? So there's both what we could sell the property for, then there's the brownfield expense that will go along with that, then there's any tax revenue, and then there's the new residents and et cetera, et cetera. And so without knowing that whole package, that question is hard to answer isolated.
I understand.
Do you see what I'm saying?
It's really hard. The problem is we need to know if we're willing to discuss it.
But how can you not be willing to discuss it, right? I
I mean, I think everything's negotiable, but,
Right.
right.
But if it's not, so the reason why I'm asking is if it wasn't negotiable, like, and we'll have further discussions about this. But if it was off the table, like we're not going to discuss the price of the property, we have an appraisal, that's what we want, we would have to go forward with that. If we want to say brownfield is on the table in full, like those are things that we have to discuss. But one of the big things that people always want to know is, well, what do you want for the property? And we always say, well, what can you bring to the city? And they say, well, it's kind of hard. So it's a lot easier to come to the price would be $150,000 or whatever based on the math that we do. From there, we're willing to negotiate depending on the tax revenues brought in and the brownfield brought in. But if council is not willing to really discuss those incentives, it's really hard for us to actually do that. So it's best to ask upfront to council. And I know it's not the easiest question to answer.
So yes,
Asking
for me.
Question.
yes.
You don't have to tell you what.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah,
God,
it's
no.
just a-
You
just a
should
straight
not
up
tell
yes
me
or
what.
no.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I think the view of council would be
Willing to
bring
have
us
a
all viable offers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
like to see what people think, what they want, and then we can decide.
Yeah.
At that point.
Yeah.
Okay. Then the last question, and Andrew, you can go to the last slide, just because I had to.
Ah,
That's my little.
hi, Mary.
That's not in ours.
That wasn't.
I know.
I was
I know.
What a surprise.
Yeah.
That's not in this one.
So anyways, this is my daughter Mary. Anyways, last question, just to kind of put a smile on the, and I think I get to do this once, so I decided to do it tonight. Does council want to put out an RFP? Do they want us to work with the MEDC to develop a redevelopment ready site? Or do we want to work with a real estate firm? Obviously, our office will be integrally involved with all of these things. My fear about an RFP is it hasn't given us what we wanted in the past. I think it's better to actually work with either a real estate firm or the MEDC, and I would actually prefer the MEDC because for one, that's free. But two, they have different tools than real estate firms have. They essentially can work like a real estate firm, except for they just don't collect commission. And because of where we've been in the state at such preferential treatment based on what we've done, it's a really great program to utilize. So these are the three options. There's also other options. If you guys know of one, I would love to hear it, but these are kind of the three things because as staff, I know I'm the director of economic development, but I also supervise, I think, 15 to 20 people, depending on if we count contractors. And so a lot of my job is administrative, and so I don't get to go out pound the pavement as much, so we do need a little bit of assistance. We want to see something happen on the site, and I do think for the last slide, the 2 slides ago, not my favorite slide, the MEDC is the way to go. But I think following that process, even if we don't go with them, to really hold community input sessions and put together a committee and have the desired development outcome, which will come to you after this meeting, hopefully before goal setting, but it might be at goal setting. So,
Counselor Somerville.
Yeah, I prefer the MEDC route.
Have we ever done the MEDC route before?
they started last year.
Okay, so this is new. Do they have a track record yet?
Yes.
And?
I will bring it to you.
I mean, like, I just wondered. I mean, do they?
No, so they've had three major deals go forward. What they have done, so we're as the city is a redevelopment ready community. What that means is our policies and procedures are fair. People understand them. They're well documented. Okay, and we also work to redevelop our sites. We've actually been really successful because the Thompson Block was one of our redevelopment ready sites. The Lot was one of our redevelopment ready sites. Not to this level by any means. But they then realized that communities needed a special task force. So there's 4 people at the state that work directly with communities like us that are redevelopment ready certified to market their priority redevelopment sites. That's the only thing they do. And so they have multiple sites. They're a relatively new arm, and they've been chomping at the bit to bite into this site. Well, we haven't had the time to actually bring it to you. So their track record is light, but I can tell you that they have multiple people well versed in the real estate market that know every major developer in the state, and bring them to the sites directly.
Thoughts on that?
I'm into it.
Okay. I will say that I've been talking a lot about RFPs, but my goal out of the RFP process is to take control of what we want more than, and to sell the property. I mean, period. And so if we can, as long as we have control over what our vision is and we're putting it out there, whether or not we get it, we increase the chances of getting it much more. That's my goal out of that. And I am comfortable with the MEDC process. It's new. I do have one question though.
Yeah.
Can we do all 3?
So.
Well, why not?
So my concern is when you put on an RFP, there's a timeline. And then you have to review those things. So it's not fair to put on an RFP and do this. Now, I'd say once we get it all packaged to the standard, give it to them. After 6 months, if we don't have any bites, we can explore the RFP option, which is basically just taking what we've done in the package and putting it out as an RFP. But I do think letting them actually pound the pavement for us really helps. As far as, I don't think we need to hire a real estate firm to do that when we actually can utilize the free help that we have.
MEDC. And another question. What would be a reasonable timeline to attach to this so we know when we need to revisit this question and try something new?
I think, in going through the records, which I have gone through exhaustive records on Water Street, it seems like
So sorry.
It seems like there's like a 4-year period where the council's getting a biannual update. And then it goes through an annual update, and then there's no update for 3 years. Something happens, and then you get a biannual update, annual update, no update. So it's kind of the whole time it's been very, very, very scattered. I would definitely say by June of next year, we should revisit Water Street and see where we've come. My plan is for goal setting, if not before, to have the vision created to help move the process forward, have the public meetings and really work with the MEDC. Hopefully, we'll be able to really do that by December. It's just we have a brand new planner starting and we have a lot of change. So we have a lot of things going on, but it's all good. So June, yes.
Councilor Will Coxon.
We could break the mold and have quarterly updates and do this on a fiscal quarters.
That's fine.
Mayor Pro Tem? Okay.
No, I didn't say anything.
Okay, I just was checking. I heard something. I want to make sure that you're saying everything that you want to share. So for now, what I would say is council would like updates about when that, if we go with the MEDC, which it sounds like council's comfortable with.
Yep.
And would you just keep us informed, probably through the CIL, city manager, Yeah, about, when it's submitted to them, and then, can the city manager and the city clerk both make sure that comes back to, us just for a revisit in June, after the budgeting season is over?
We might be even able to have the MEDC come,
Ah,
give a presentation on the services and everything like that,
would love that.
because they work for us.
Can you please,
I'll
make,
work on that, yeah. I
that'd
wanna,
be lovely. Great. Did you have something,
Did
Councilman?
anybody mention a casino?
we can't use our incentives for a casino. Sorry.
What a scam.
Super complicated.
Any further questions?
For Mary?
Yeah, I want to know, where she plans on attending college. Yeah.
Well, it's between EMU and State, because that's where Jenny went. Sorry, guys.
Oh, it's
Well, we live in Ipsy, so,
It's green either way.
one color scheme.
exactly.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe.
That was
great.
MSU for grad school.
I just want to follow up. I want to ask staff at large, did staff receive the feedback and guidance that they want and they needed to move forward on this project?
I think you guys gave me everything I needed.
Okay.
I still have to kind of think about the vision a little bit, but the plan is to take what you guys said, wrap it into a vision, have you guys tear that apart before we actually go out with MEDC. So,
Thank you.
so this won't be the last time you guys work on your vision, and I promise you, Councilmember Morgan, you'll have far more detail in the next, and when you actually review the vision.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Beautiful daughter, Joe.
It's now time for our second public comment. And same speech as before. And Mr. Hergott, would you like to be our first? Please state your name and address again for the record.
Mark Hergott, 111 Mile Street. So the thing about Water Street is it will never happen again. The constitutional amendment was put in place. This is the last thing that people like you will ever do as far as Ypsilanti or any other Michigan municipality is concerned. So take your time. If people 20 years from you have an open green spot that has been bioremediated and there's no debt left on it, then you did a good job. Focus on the boring and make it easier for people that come after you. Solar panels on every roof in Ypsilanti. Not sexy, slow, probably it'll take 25 years. You can do it. Putting in 100 yards of infrastructure on Water Street over 20 years. Not sexy, you can do it, you can budget it. Maybe get a train station that is some gravel and an aluminum ADA required ramp that the conductors can shove up against the train. Not sexy, but you can budget it and it has room for improvement. He wants to have a beautiful structure that he can brag about to his grandchildren. I want that for you too. I'd also like it if the several 100,000 people that live here and 2050 have a nice place to live, if not an okay place to live. And focus on the boring. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hergott. Stephen? Please state your name and address for the record.
Soon to be 52 North Huron business owner. Just real simple. I voted against the Water Street millage. Mark and I beat beat each other up on the topic of taxes on a regular basis. Water Street's a big albatross. I mean, we're all paying for it. Mark and I would love to see something done on it. But I also visit Canton very regularly. I perform at the Village Theater in Cherry Hill. The Biltmore project there has been 20 plus years. It was there turn of the millennium, and they're still not 100% occupied in the commercial spaces. If you go up there on Ridge Road, there are vacant commercial spaces on the ground floor. There are plenty of nice houses. They're selling them for $350,000 with the garages off the back, plenty of green space, all named after presidents and such. Canton, of course, has more money than we do. They have more resources than we do. They also don't have a specific downtown. Canton is not walkable at all. It's an entire township. A couple of my other notes here. Just a reminder to council, your positions are temporary. Like Mark says, take into account the people that'll be here 15, 20, 50, maybe even 100 years if you're that perhaps forward thinking. And this may sound comical, but maybe focus on we'd love to see the whole parcel developed in one shot. Boom, done. We can walk away, be happy with it. I've seen them at Baxter Village in Fort Mill, South Carolina. That took 15 years to even get anywhere. Develop the streetscape first in terms of the Michigan Avenue stretch. Zone out that particular section and say, okay, we want mixed use, three stories, and then you have something like the Thompson block. Boom, right there. So I call it like the Disney streetscape. You can worry about what's behind it later. You get in what you want. And I think most of us agree here, we need the density, we need more housing, whether it's affordable or market rate. That's not up for grabs. We just need to we don't necessarily want to pigeonhole ourselves into something that says, okay, well, we want to be youth focused or elderly focused. We want to be viable to everybody because frankly, this is for money. We want to make it revenue generating for the city. Money goes back into the tax rolls. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Who else would like to speak to council? Mr. Geringer? Please state your name and address for the record.
There. Brian Geringer, gerrymandered part of Ward 1. I really like what Mark said. I think that's very wise. But lots of thoughts today. I'm really disappointed in the audience here today. And I guess I don't really know if you all are seeking public input on this. I think it's incredibly short-sighted not to be doing so, but if this is what seeking public input is supposed to look like, I think you should consider it a failure. Certainly there needed to be more outreach. I hope that this isn't what that was supposed to be and that there will be, okay, cool. So there'll be sessions in the future. Okay, cool. Yeah, public input, super important. Obviously 20,000 people know better than 7 people what they'd like to see in a big property like that. I'm curious what you all think of what happened with International Village a couple of years ago. I think that it would be extremely important for you all to make public-facing statements about that because, it's important. It affected the whole town. Clearly what goes in here is going to affect the whole town. I think affordable housing is also on the top of everyone's mind. I would consider reaching out to organizations like Ready or other ones. Mr. Myers mentioned that one of the serious contenders is really interested in public input. Maybe. If so, that should be like the obvious choice, because the fact that Ready and the CBO exists, I think it's quite clear that the city is interested in self-determination, and I think that, who wouldn't be, sort of. And then also just one sort of moonshot idea here. Since our city does have a history of redlining, of government-approved destruction of a black business area, and is built on indigenous land, I wonder if we've considered instating some sort of program in reparative justice to put Water Street in the hands of indigenous and/or black populations. I think... I don't think that's going to happen, but I think that, it's practically 2020. Reparations are going to be more and more on everyone's mind, and in a city like this, it's probably the only thing that really makes sense. So,
Thank you very much. Who else would like to give comment at this time? Seeing none, I'm going to close public comment. And I'm just going to point council to the busy schedule that we have coming up. And so make sure these are all on your calendars. I think this is a very effective meeting. I think that it really helped clarify a lot of both the history of where we are and where we could go with Water Street. I'm very thankful to staff for the large amount of work that went into this. And so I just want to say that. City Manager, do you have anything to add?
I have nothing.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, everybody. And is there a motion to adjourn?
Support.
All those in favor? Aye. Great.
Aye.
When did we get the date for the recycling? Yeah, I don't remember that. So I can't.
You gotta go back to get your mother. Your children up there.
My daughter.
Okay, I seen your stuff. What was your question?
About the time, I'm not gonna be able to make it.
Nathan.
You saw Nathan?
Yeah, me and my lady went to
Oh, he's the sweetest. You know, he's
keep up to it.
Attend like
the meeting's over.
he's taking care of his. I mean, I don't mean that like age thing, but just like
But
the sweetness of
I do mean that.
for your. I'm good. Congratulations.
Okay,
How you're-
I'll get one favor.
Favors.
On
I
top.
tell my daughter only have,
Yeah, I'll,
I love them both. He's trying.
I don't think until you live it though, but you know what? If my brother-in-law and his wife can survive their twins, you'll be okay.
Okay.
Well, and they're not like, you know what I mean? So.